I'm a strong believer in personal development and feedback. You need to give very structured feedback on a very regular basis.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Executives, the show where we navigate the intricate world of executive leadership, exploring strategies, insights, and personal stories of successful professionals shaping the global business landscape. I'm your host, Majid, and joining us today is Georg. Georg Hauer is a seasoned fintech operator, venture builder, and former general manager at N26, where he helped scale the company from under $500 million to a $9 billion valuation. With roots in strategy consulting at BCG, Georg brings deep expertise in launching and growing digital financial products. Today, he leads Hauer Fintech Advisory, working with banks, fintechs, and VCs to build and scale innovative, regulation ready financial solutions across the global markets. Let us welcome Georg. Grüß dich, Georg, und herzlich willkommen bei The Executives.
Thanks a lot, Majid. Great to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
I try to speak Austrian German, and I live in Germany, but my German is very German, So there is the whole dialect thing is very different, right?
You sounded very authentic, so congrats.
So now I do speak Austrian German.
Absolutely, I would vouch for that.
Cool. Yeah, that's good. I tried to do justice by summarizing the whole experience. Now I would like to give you the stage so you can tell the listeners more about who is Georg.
Yeah. Oh, thanks a lot. First of all, I think what's important is whatever I did in the past, it was always a team effort. Honestly, none of the milestones that we have achieved at various fintechs would have been possible without the large number of people that were on board, including, of course, my colleagues and the founders that were leading these businesses. So I think, generally speaking, I have a very strong passion about making banking better globally. And I believe with the right technology nowadays, we have a better toolkit than ever before. At the same time, however, there are so many pitfalls along the way, especially on a regulatory level, but frankly speaking, on all various dimensions, that it's also becoming more and more complex to build a digital bank or fintechs. What I noticed when working with various digital banks and fintechs around the world, that essentially most of them try to solve the same problems. However, the way they're approaching the challenges are very different. Why? Well, typically fintechs and banks, they consider the other banks in the same country as competitors, so you don't speak to them. But those banks that operate outside of your home market, they're out of scope, because why would you talk to them? They have nothing to do with your market, and you maybe are even convinced that your market is so unique and different that you anyway wouldn't be able to learn anything from others. Truthfully, I believe this is it creates a huge potential where you can learn from other banks or other fintechs around the world. And actually, sometimes even a glance across the border can be a glance into the future. So a lot of the innovation that has been coming across the border or has been emerging in our markets in the last years has been already a standard in other markets, for example, in Asia, for example, in Latin America. But we just haven't been paying attention that those aspects were already common elsewhere. And vice versa, other markets are benefiting hugely from the developments that we currently see in Europe. So I believe that just bringing the fintech and banking ecosystem globally just a little bit closer, we can learn a lot from each other.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember when I was studying, right, what you mentioned about the whole differences between countries, right? I remember it was 2015, and I went from Germany to Thailand to work there.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me 7 minutes to open a bank account and another 3 minutes to get a debit card.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, when I closed my bank account, they said, hey, do you still have the debit card? I said, yes. They said, give it back to us and you get the money back. But I liked it so much that it was super cool and super fast, right? And that time in Germany, it used to take a week to get or actually 10 days to get a bank account. So.
Well, fortunately, that time is gone as well, even in Germany. But if I look back at my career in the past 15 years, I was very lucky and that I could work and see the banking industry from 4 very different perspectives. So I started back in the days in management consulting, where I worked with very large traditional banks, helping them on IT and core banking migrations, on M&A, on operations efficiency topics, etc. And more digital strategy was part of it. I then later on I joined the early management of Uber in Europe, essentially learning how to scale a digital business also outside of the financial services world. Then I returned to that because I believed that digital banking could truly be disrupted. And frankly speaking, I was searching a company that had the potential of Uber, but was 4 or 5 years earlier in the life cycle. And at that point, I found N26, and I was already a customer before that. And frankly speaking, one of my core motivations why I believe that N26 could be the right company to join is because I truly hated the traditional banks that existed back in the days in Germany and Austria, because they're just so unbelievably annoying. The products absolutely sucked. And frankly speaking, I thought that I would do the world a favor if I would help build a significantly better bank. So I joined the N26, had various different roles. I think probably my most important one was that I was general manager for the German-speaking markets in Northern Europe, a region of 15 countries, which was by far the largest region of N26 at the time, and also contributed quite significantly to the global revenue of the company. And I was also managing director of one of the 2 technology centers and built up quite a few other global functions as well. And interestingly, this was one perspective. I had been an advisor and I had been a consultant for banks. I had then been part of the team that built and run the bank. But then I saw potential that a lot of the innovation so far happened in the interface. So essentially trying to make banking better from an app perspective. However, if you look at where do banks invest their hard-earned euros or US dollars, it's actually in the infrastructure. So 90% of the investments go into the interface in the infrastructure that you do not even see as a customer. And I spent more and more time on that, and I figured out one of the biggest challenges was compliance, especially anti-money laundering. And at that point, I then invested into and joined a very early stage anti-money laundering software company called Hawk, back then still called Hawk AI, which had a brilliant technology, but was fairly early in the life cycle. And I had just a really strong conviction that this market would not only be completely disrupted in the next couple of years, but that this specific founder team and this company was the right one to do that. So I joined this compliance software company, and it helped me create a new perspective on banking, because before I was in a team that ran and built a bank, but now I was also working on the compliance tech stack, on the bank infrastructure, so essentially the entire infrastructure that powered the banks. And then during that time, I also had my 4th perspective, working very closely with regulators, not just as a supervised subject as a bank, but rather we were working with regulators on how to become more innovative, how to understand innovation, how to integrate AI into bank compliance processes. So I had this wonderful, very holistic perspective on the banking industry, and that made me realize how many synergies exist across borders, but also across banks. And that's why I'm now committed, on the one side, to help bank infrastructure, especially compliance, fintechs, scale internationally, and fix some of the biggest challenges that the banking industry has globally. And on the other side, build better digital banks, both greenfield, but also help traditional banks digitize and become more digital end to end, like from the interface towards the entire tech stack. And I believe that there is so much synergies around there. And I'm really grateful that I had this experience to see banking very holistically, because that enabled me even to see some of the challenges that banks are facing today.
I think like when you look at the normal people, right, what you mentioned is very true about they are not aware about, for example, if I went to anyone, they will not know about Hawk AI and how critical entities like Hawk AI are, like how much they actually help the bank. Because at the end of the day, you have your debit card, right, or credit card in your pocket. Someone can even like swipe, try to steal it and try to do transactions. That's where these software jump in. When you go and make a purchase at Edeka or any supermarket or something, you tap the card and immediately it's sent to the system, checked for fraud, and then is sent back. The user doesn't feel anything, like nothing.
Yeah, and it takes a few milliseconds as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I used to work at Griff, the response rate was like 180 milliseconds. So it was like this,
Yeah,
send
yeah.
the data. And the thing is that what I told my friends that time, I was like, dude, you cannot imagine the amount of data it is. It's not just, Georg Hauer, born at this state, address this. No, it's a lot of data. So the way they handle the whole data and fraud prevention. So, and I know finance was actually, fintech was one of the first ones to accept AI. They used to call it machine learning before, like the whole AI, because of like managing a lot of data. That's cool. That's quite a journey. Like that's quite some interesting things to have done. But I have a fun little question. I want to introduce like a question that I have a feeling you already know this question because you have been talking about going back and so on. So let's say you woke up to tomorrow morning and you open your door and there's a time machine sitting outside for you, but there's a condition. You can use it only for one day and one time. So you can go anywhere, anytime you want. So where or when you will go and why?
So let me answer this in two ways. If it was basically, if I could solve financial problems or financial topics, I think the very simple answer is I would go probably 10 years into the future. I want to understand what's the market cap of the largest companies and where the indices stand. And essentially based on that, I would make my investment strategy. That's a pretty boring, pretty straightforward answer. Let's assume I'm kind of thinking of that idea also in a way that imagine you could use it, but you can't actually benefit from it, because that makes the answer a lot more complex. And I would probably my natural curiosity would probably tell me I would love to experience the Roman Empire back at its peak, or the Greek Empire at its peak, or maybe the ancient Egyptian Empire. Truthfully, that would be my curiosity speaking. On the other side, when it's about actually solving problems, I would love to go into the future and would understand how they have solved potentially some of the biggest crises that are still, I would say, burdening us today, from sanitation topics to solving certain sicknesses, or frankly speaking, cancer treatment or others. I would love to learn about that and bring it back to society. So these are three different ways how to answer it. To be honest, if I could only use it once, it would be a very tough call to do. But there's definitely a lot to be learned, both from the past and the future.
I like the fact that you introduce yourself the limitation that you cannot use it for your own benefit. Otherwise, it's easy. You go in the future, see which stocks are where, come back and say, you know what, let's invest in these stocks.
Yeah. Check. I would love to know the Bitcoin price in 10 years from now.
True. Me too. If you figure it out, if you get the time machine, let me know as well. So cool. But today our topic is a little bit more serious. Like we want to talk about scaling fintech, lessons in leadership, regulation, and global growth. But before we talk into that, I think we partly touched a little bit about your advisory company that you run now, right? You started Hauer FinTech Advisory. So quickly explain to the listeners what does it actually do?
Yeah, great question. So I have two business models in a nutshell. On the one side, I have a venture builder where I work with early stage fintechs and help them scale. I typically don't work. Basically, I'm not an advisor per se, where I just talk much, but actually I'm very operational. So I rather call myself a fractional executive joining fintechs at an early stage. And typically, the infrastructure fintechs, very often even in compliance, fraud, authentication, and others, and help them scale. And typically, I do this for equity. I'm a strong believer. I want to find the next interesting fintechs. I was lucky with some of my investments in the past, and I'm a very strong believer that equity is the only upside that is really a game changer. On the other side, I have an advisory boutique that is focused on building digital banks around the world, but also transforming and improving existing banks and making them more digital, more customer friendly, and frankly speaking, also more efficient. So those are the two aspects that I'm doing. It's all, I would say, united by the idea that I love working with interesting founders and executives around the world. I believe that the problems that we are solving are quite similar across the world, and I'm a strong believer that we can significantly accelerate the process of building a bank or a fintech just by knowing the mistakes or errors that others have done in the past.
True. I mean, you scaled up in 26. You have invested in multiple startups as well. So you have so much experience down your sleeves that if a startup comes to you, you can immediately tell them what's the direction they can take, right? Because you know regulations, you know how things work, and also it will help them at the end of the day. And one thing you mentioned, because like oftentimes when you reach a certain point, right, it's like so hard that startups can even afford you, almost impossible for them to afford you even for an hour, because this the
Yeah.
that's why I think.
Yeah, I mean that's the reason why I work for equity, because
Mm.
I mean it's a bit, it would be a bit silly to even offer a startup to work for even like discounted corporate rates, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But with equity, basically we have the common alignment of interests, and I only win when they win, so that makes a lot of sense for everyone.
True. And then the win can be 10x, 100x, like where the startup goes, right? So
Ideally we solve a lot of problems on the way, and we also enjoy the ride, because at the end of the day, I think any, like, no matter the title that I held in the past, I always say I do two things: I fix problems and I find opportunities. Like, what title you want to slap on my head doesn't even really matter. It's like those two focus areas remain the same.
that's very nice that like, I mean, titles are there in for example, and bigger banks and bigger corps, it makes sense. But in startups, like, you can have a CTO but who's coding, you can have a
Yeah.
CMO who's doing customer support, you can have a CPO who's writing user stories,
Yeah.
you can have a CEO who's talking with investors, and the hour after he's going and talking to a customer,
Yeah.
signing a contract or a deal.
I would argue that no matter how senior you are, you need to talk to your customers essentially daily. I've been in board meetings with bank executives, and they have the vision to build a digital bank or transform their existing bank. And then I ask them, so when was the last time you actually spoke with a customer about your solution, that a customer that you were not related to? And very often the answer is shocking. They haven't done it in the last year or more. And this is one of the big challenges. That's the larger the corporate is, the more senior the executive, the further they are away from customers. Which is why I'm a very strong defender of the idea that if you want to actually transform your business, you need to send your executives to the front line. And the front line in a digital bank means customer service. It means the fraud operations, to essentially interact with customers at their normal customers, to the worst customers, but also the best ones, your fans. And that's why, for example, at N26, it was very common that at least once a quarter, but sometimes even once a month, and that the actual executive teams were sitting in the customer service center and joining the calls, sometimes even taking over calls themselves to solve it. And I had many meetings every month with our customer service teams to just trying to fix some of their problems, because they listen, they speak to the customers. If you ask a customer service agent of a bank, what are the 10 things that we should improve, the answer that you're getting is probably 1,000 times better than anything that your marketing team is going to tell you. Vice versa, by the way, when I was at Uber, I was part of a team that built Uber Eats in Europe, I went out and delivered food. And the very first time I did that, I realized, man, there are like 10 things I would change from the app, the experience, the process. And by the way, man, I didn't realize how hard this job is. Especially I didn't even realize that how hilly my city was, because with a car and the bus, that doesn't really matter, right? But when you're on a bicycle, suddenly every hill is felt 10 times harder. So if you actually go to the front line and experience what your own employees and your own customers are doing, only then are you actually going to understand the challenges and problems and also improvement potentials of your own product.
True. I 100% agree. I mean, during MBA, I also tried to do odd jobs just to understand like how does it feel, because it's not easy. I mean, if you're educated, if you're doing a good job, I'm not saying that the jobs we like corporate jobs are easy, but jobs are not easy in general. Like nothing
Mhm.
is easy.
Of course, absolutely, absolutely. But the interesting thing is actually the so-called simple jobs often, which are actually interacting with customers, are those that know the customers best. And ironically,
True.
those are the people that often senior bank executives listen the least to.
Yep, I agree. I agree. Like I remember working with the company, and the customer success kept saying the way we handle data is horrible, because we had one guy coming from a bank. He said, "This is not good. This is not good. We need to change this."
Mhm.
No executive listened to him. Yeah, yeah. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. He's just saying it because he wants more processes there. I was like, "Hey, he's actually right, because I wouldn't like to share sensitive data of customers over Teams chats.
Yeah.
So I mean, but what was the reason basically you moved to fintech? I mean, everyone has a story there. Fintech is a special industry. You don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, let's go to fintech.
Well, the story is a funny one. When I started so first of all, like right after university, that was back in 2009, 2010, I went on a trip to Eastern Africa. Traveled Uganda and a few other places. And I remember being in this village in Uganda, super rural area, and I see people that back in the days, by the way, also solar panels weren't that common or very expensive, in fact. So nowadays in Africa, everyone has solar panels and charges their phone with these portable solar panels. But back then, that didn't exist. So they had phones, they had these dumb Nokia phones, but they didn't even have electricity there. But they had a kiosk where they went to the kiosk and paid like a shilling to have their phone charged. What was interesting is, although they didn't have electricity in that village, after they got their phone back, they could take money, they could pay money to the kiosk, have it uploaded directly onto their phone, and then send that like some shillings to their family in the neighbor village, all from their old Nokia phone or old feature phone. And I had the feeling, be mindful, it's 15 years ago. Wait a moment. So that guy just sent money for basically no cost to his family in another village from his phone, without going to a bank branch, without calling anyone, frankly speaking, without internet, without having even electricity in his village. And I was baffled because I realized, like, wait a moment, in Germany, I can't do that. And that was essentially, I would say, the birth, the initiation that sparked, that created this idea that I think this is a huge potential. Banking can be done so much better than it is in currently what we see in Europe, and frankly speaking, in most of parts of the world. So when I returned to Europe, I started in consulting, but I was actually super disappointed back then from the banking projects, because you work basically for these very large behemoths, and IT projects in banking are even more boring because it's typically you merge two of the most boring and old-fashioned systems that you can possibly imagine, both coded in the 80s and maybe 90s if you're lucky. But it's actually super frustrating. And but essentially, during the years, although I learned the problems that exist, I realized that they weren't the ones that are going to solve the problem anytime soon. And then when I found N26, like back in like early 2015, they had just launched. I became a customer right away and experienced this for the very first time. Wait a moment, this is banking how it could be. And I remembered my experience in Africa, and I realized this, I might be one of the first customers of N26 right now, but this can be really, really big. This isn't a fintech. This isn't just a small gimmick that is relevant for tech-savvy people. This could be the everyday bank for absolutely everyone. And that's essentially where the idea was created, to go into fintech and make banking better.
Mhm. I will share something with you. So I come from Pakistan.
Mhm.
And the thing is, in Pakistan, our literacy rate is not the highest. So we have a similar service. I think it was Telenor, the Norwegian company, the telco company. They
Mhm.
launched it. The similar concept to what you mentioned, and they were targeting smaller cities, because imagine if I have to send 300 rupees, which is approximately €1 as of now, more or less.
Mhm.
it would cost me, one, a fortune. Two, I'm not able to fill forms because all of them
Mm.
are in English. Three, it would be so expensive for the bank that the banks would just say, you know what, run away.
Mm.
Because it's not interesting for them, right? The use case is not interesting. And Pakistan is a low income country.
Mhm.
So what Telenor did was they introduced this phone banking. So you could actually send money from like one phone number to the other phone number.
Mm.
The same thing what you're mentioning, the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
No need of fingerprints, no need of
Mhm.
signatures. They would actually connect this because the SIM card is connected with your national identity card, like
Mhm.
your ausweis or your the government given ID, right? So basically it's actually connected.
Mhm.
So people opened up accounts. They had limits, of course. They were not allowed to send too much money. I think you could, like, even now you can send maximum like 150 euros. But
Mhm.
considering in terms of Pakistan, it's still more
Mhm.
money. Like I think
Yeah.
50,000 rupees or something. That time I remember I had like some people opening those accounts up, and they had the funniest names possible. So for example, Majid would be written as magic with a C, because the guy doesn't know how to use a computer or something.
Mm.
Mahmood is written with some other weird spelling,
Mm.
because our NICs, like identity cards, were also in another language. So it was like,
Mm.
however they felt like it, they would just type it in. But it made life easy, and
Mm.
it was cheap.
Yeah.
It was cheap. But now you helped N26, right? You helped them scale from $500 million to 9 billion. That's like almost like 20x.
Well,
Uh,
I can't. I mean, I always tend to say the valuation is nice, and to be honest, like I don't even remember exactly what was the exact valuation when I joined, but it was essentially before the Series C when I joined, which obviously was fairly early on, and the valuations was just a means to itself. It just reflected the fact that a lot of people were believing in it. On the other side, it was also reflecting the fact that the business model was working really well. Revenues was increasing, and if anyone paid attention, last quarter, sort of Q4 last year, so actually 2 quarters ago, where the first quarter is now that N26 is absolutely like fully profitable, and this year is supposed to be the year that N26 will become completely profitable on a group level, which is a super exciting milestone. And you see that in general currently in the industry, that it took maybe 10 years for digital banking to become totally mainstream. And a lot of the skeptics and critics had always said you can't make money in retail banking. Well, you see actually the new banks now are proving that you can.
Yeah, true, 100%. And the whole introduction, I think N26 was one of the first ones to introduce contextual banking, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that was like a game changer for me when I read about it. And I remember it was N26 and also Revolut, and these guys just jumped in. And it was like a game changer. I was like, dude, I would use this stuff because this is for me. This is not for the person sitting next
Yeah.
to me. Even if they have a bank account, we get based on our preferences. The services they sell to us, the things they will try to sell to us would be based on my preferences.
Yeah.
But the question with respect to N26 is growing it from 500 million to 9 billion is not something small, right? So it would have been definitely challenging. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you actually faced through that journey?
Mm-hmm. So one big challenge very early on was after we managed to unleash this hypergrowth, where we essentially managed to position a product. And I mean, first of all, the team built a product that was very strong, and then my role was to position it and scale it to the market, and that worked very well. I wouldn't even call it a challenge because we did a lot of things, and a lot of these things seem to work. But one of the challenges was, how do you keep up with the growth of the customer side? How do you build an organization that supports that and also builds for the future? So at N26, when I joined, we were about 200, 250, maybe below 300 people. And within a matter of 1.5 years, we scaled to 1,500 people. So basically, within already the first year, we basically hired more than 1,000 people. How do you do that effectively? And even how do you onboard them from a practical perspective? There were some onboarding days where I think the highest onboarding day was maybe about 100 people we onboarded on one single day, which there were always 2 onboarding slots per month. But that was wild, like just from a logistics perspective, how do you do that? In the hindsight, I would say we solved the challenges, but in the hindsight, I probably would do it differently still. One of the aspects is we grow really quickly because we believe that that's the best way to do it. In the hindsight, probably, if we had hired a few bits fewer people and integrated them better, I feel we could have achieved the same results, but potentially maybe slightly later, but just moved step by step rather than trying to do everything at once. Having said that, it still worked what we did. It's just, I would say, that kind of scale, that kind of growth always comes with its challenges, and just making sure that you digest that growth, and on the other side you sustain a culture that takes away the best parts of the old culture and evolves into a new, more mature and professional culture is probably one of the biggest and most underestimated challenges that is out there. But I think we did a pretty decent job with that at N26, but definitely that was a big challenge.
I don't know what's the reason, but I think a lot of startups that do hyper growth, right, can relate to this problem because I've seen so many who basically get funding. I don't know what's the reason, but they just start hiring. Like suddenly there are like 200 positions open, and then the 200 people are found, they join in, but then these 200 people have nothing to do because they're like, okay, so what should we do? That's
Well, the problem is actually not that. The problem is rather there's always something to do. And in fact, even when after we quadrupled or quintupled in size, there's still the feeling that we need more people. So I think that the question is rather, how do you prioritize effectively, and how do you set processes that actually sustain the organization? Because truthfully is you can hire 300 extra people and they will be all super busy. It's much harder to actually restrain yourself and say, we're not going to hire another 300 people, but maybe only 50. Let's decide which are the most important roles. And then the second aspect, which is super important, is how do you translate and transition decision processes that used to be taken by, let's say, 100 people, and now you have 500 people in the management. How do you translate that? Because the decision processes need to be different. And one of the challenges that a lot of scale-ups are facing is in the early days, you hire people that you expect to be involved in everything, and everyone is kind of passionately driven and wants to influence everything. But if you suddenly become a more mature organization, you can't have everyone voicing their opinion on everything. And this is culturally a very tough transition, because initially you wanted that behavior, and you actually still want that people care. But you have to have more restrictive decision processes, because building the best products, it cannot be a democracy, because otherwise you're gonna just have compromises over compromises. You just have to have a very distinct product, and you might have to decline deliberately things that might be good decisions by themselves, but holistically there might be other aspects that are more important.
very, very nicely put. I mean, like whenever I talk to startups, I tell them to think of processes as well, because if you get money or if you want to onboard 5, 10 more people, you need to be able to onboard them quickly because you're a startup. You don't have capital like corporates, or you don't want a person to be onboarded in 6 months. You need them to be onboarded in a day. Second, they start working quickly. I remember from my example, if I give an example, I built a replica of a job platform like Indeed, Monster, etc. And the first thing I did, it was like a very ugly looking, like very, very ugly looking, like it was okay. What I said was like, I need to have the process. Like I would remember it was like 2 people or 3 people entering jobs. I remember I made the product manager who was working as a product manager, senior PM, 8 years experience. I told her, you have to enter jobs. She was like, Majid, why? I'm like, then you will understand the pain that the people will go through. And she did, and she realized that whatever she was making a hypothesis of, like she was too like growth driven with respect to revenue. She was forgetting the actual users. And we scaled it so much, like we made it so easy because of the process. A person starts today, the next day they are entering like 50 jobs a day.
Yeah.
And then eventually we were with 10 people, we were entering 2,000 jobs manually a single day.
Yeah. I think sometimes if you set just a certain new frame of reference, people realize that there are different ways of solving that. I learned that a lot at Uber, where we tried essentially to grow truly at scale. We never were happy with 2% optimization, but it was about how do you add another zero behind the booking numbers. And you just try to have to be totally creative in the problem solving process. And as a leader, that's one of the aspects, one of the directional inputs that you can give them and actually make a real difference.
And this is connected with the point you just mentioned before, right? That talk to the customer. Like if you're an executive, doesn't mean you're wearing a fancy suit, a 10,000 euro watch, Mont Blanc bag, which costs like 3,000 euros or something, driving a Bugatti or Maserati.
Yeah, I've never worn any of those watches, and I didn't even have a car until very recently. So yeah.
So this snippet is going to a lot of my friends who keep telling me, Majid, you need to have a car. I would say, look, this guy ran N26 for so many years. He's an investor.
Well, I didn't run it. I ran part of it, but I can tell you, like frankly speaking, I never owned a car in my life. The car we currently have is my wife's company car. So I never believed in consumption items. I don't believe that. If you love watches, be my guest. Do it. You should follow your passions, but for the sake of God, don't buy a watch because you want to impress other people.
Very well said. No, true, 100%. I mean, but I'm still sending this clip to my friends who tell me, Majid, why don't you have a car? You live in Berlin. You need to have a car.
Yeah,
and I tell them, I don't need
especially
a car.
Berlin. Berlin, you absolutely don't.
The transport might be, it's delayed or something, but it's still good. I'm happy with it. But
it is good.
You have evolved as well, right? As a person from when you started and now, and like consulting and N26, now your own gig. How did you see your leadership basically style evolving with managing teams at scale, especially considering you operated in fast growing and regulated environments, because those are very specific markets, right?
Absolutely. So it's true that in highly regulated markets, you have to apply a certain leadership style, which is different than in maybe other tech industries. So the old Facebook slogan, move fast and break things, doesn't work in FinTech because if you break things, you might lose your license. Generally speaking, however, my leadership style developed, especially, obviously you mature, you grow as a person. I learned a lot, I made a lot of mistakes, and then I learned even more. But, and I think a few thoughts here. So first of all, I am a strong believer that with the right team, you can solve absolutely anything. So finding the right individuals, the right people that form the right team is probably one of the key roles as a leader, and how to find them, that changed quite significantly over the years. The second aspect is you shouldn't just hire the smartest, or not just smartest, the best, most suiting people for that role, but you also need to empower them to actually take decision by themselves and drive the progress forward. A lot of the best ideas we had at N26, at Hawk, and a few other companies came from the people, from the team members, and not from me. Frankly speaking, the majority of good ideas probably didn't come from me. And that's why I'm also always so important to point out that I didn't run anything. It's essentially was really a team effort, and there were a lot of people that probably had a lot more impact on a lot of products than myself, and they might not even be consciously aware of that. And but it's always a team effort. And the third aspect is I'm a strong believer in personal development and feedback. You need to give very structured feedback on a very regular basis, but depending on how the person wants to receive feedback. That's why it's one of the aspects when the onboarding talk, when we hired a person, they're having their first talk, one of the first discussions I have with people is, how do you want to receive feedback? Do you want to have it ad hoc? Do you want to have it basically immediately? Do you want to have it on a regular sit down when we have maybe a lunch, an informal lunch? Or should I rather tell you on a quarterly formal feedback session? Do you want to have it warm? Or do you want to have it straight to the point, super direct, and with a clear list of things that you can improve otherwise? So how to give feedback, you need to adjust to your audience. And I'm a very strong believer that you shouldn't just give feedback to your own team members, but also to your peers, to your managers, and including other people that you might not even have any direct link with. But I think feedback is the best way to enable people to grow, and even yourself as a leader.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like one thing I remember my mentor said to me, Majid, give feedback, but also be prepared to receive feedback.
Yes.
He said most of the times the most common mistakes leaders do is they will just give feedback. You need to improve this, improve that, and blah 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 blah. But if the person comes like, hey dude, give me the power to actually be able to implement this, and then you're like, no,
Yeah.
I'm the director or VP or whatever,
Mhm.
and you're basically not ready for feedback. So 100% with
Yeah.
what you mentioned
Yeah.
about you
Yeah.
should basically listen to the people as well on different ranks. I mean, there is also like the whole point. It connects again back to the first point you mentioned about talk to your customers.
Hmm.
You will never have time if you're, let's say, the director of product in a bank. You would have probably about 4 to 5 product managers. 4 to 5 product managers means that, let's say, 5 developers per team, which is about 16 to 20 developers. It will not be possible for you to talk to 20 different people, and we are just talking about development right now. We are not talking about anything else. No compliance, no
Mm.
fraud, nothing else. So if you start talking with every single person, it would be impossible for you. You would be working 24/7, 365, and still you will not be done with the people. That's why you
Mm.
start
Mm.
delegating,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's why you empower, like you also mentioned. But what I would love to understand is, during your time at N26, or any for example, of your career, right? There are these funny stories, like things you think about now, but you don't forget them. Do you have one that where you basically did like something? I remember someone told me waiting for the postman to deliver something. I started arguing with the guy in German, and his team was sitting in India or something. So they basically were laughing that this guy's like me, like they didn't understand what the guy was saying. So, but he didn't mute
Yeah.
himself. So, do you have funny stories as well like that?
Well, there are probably a million funny stories around that. I think that the most memorable ones are the ones where you kind of in hindsight think like, wow, um, like that was very meaningful, or I could never imagined the company to grow that much. And I think one thing that I really enjoyed at N26, for example, is back in the days we worked with other fintechs quite closely. And a lot of these fintechs became quite significant. Like, for example, our very first core banking provider, Mambu. When we partnered up, we were one of the first customers. We remained one of the largest customers for a long time. Now they're a multi-billion-dollar company. That was, I mean, I believed in the company, and I obviously when N26 started partnership, I wasn't there yet, but I was very, very bullish in the company. And then a few years later, they grew basically as much as N26 itself. The same with Wise, back then still known as TransferWise. We also were a super early partner of them, integrated them directly into the app, and they grew very profitably and large. Another one which I set up directly, in the super early days of N26, I wanted to make sure that my teams, and I believe when we started, we launched new. I launched the new product marketing team at N26. This didn't exist before, and I came from Uber, where product marketing was a totally normal function, which was essentially created out of Silicon Valley. And I basically convinced the N26 team to found product marketing as a function. And so, in order to make sure that the teams that we got on board learned from the best, I set up knowledge exchanging calls with other digital banks around the world, which were essentially had nothing to do with our markets, but we believed we could help each other. And one bank that I got along with particularly well, and we had multiple sessions with them, was back then small digital bank from Brazil, which was Nubank. And now they are this absolute behemoth, even bigger than N26 itself. But it was really exciting to see basically other fintechs. You learn from other fintechs and you see them grow. And those were essentially my first realizations and discussions with other banks internationally, how similar some of the challenges are and how much we could learn from them. And we did. And maybe they learned also something from us, maybe. And I think it's in the hindsight, it almost seems so obvious because these names are all very well known. But if you sit in the room in these early days, you talk to the founders and senior executives of these nowadays very large fintechs, it's very memorable to think back at those discussions because you kind of, in the hindsight, you could rationalize that these companies would become large as well. But maybe, frankly speaking, they would now say the same about N26. Also, N26 grew significantly, and back then we were also just I would say, small or medium-sized fintech.
I remember I met one founder. He was also pretty successful. He said, my baby grew up, so it has graduated university. So now it's going in the
Yeah,
real world. So he used to use that
that's true.
phrase. So it's the
That's
same,
true.
right?
That's true.
But now finance is fintechs are very special. Regulations, we already touched upon it. And then you cannot just release anything you want. Product manager came up with a brilliant idea. You know what? Let's just roll it out. It doesn't work like that. So how do you balance product velocity with compliance, especially because this is again a regulated industry, right?
Yeah. So the truth is, you have to scale both at the same time. If you succeed only in one and fail in the other, you're going to fail as a company generally. What is important to think about it very early on how can you set up processes and solutions that scale with your organization, because it's what's expensive and cumbersome is changing processes and solutions over time. But ideally, you set up something early on that can scale with you. N26 did quite a few of those things. Some of them were also self-built, and in some cases, we learned that potentially we didn't pick the right solution. But I think thinking of that very early on, how can you set it up for the future? And to be honest, it's never too early to think about compliance.
True, true. I mean, and also you need to I remember when I was working in fintech, I had the legal team reached out to us and stopped us from releasing. We already built something because the customer said this is cool, this is cool. So we were like, yeah, customer priority. So we almost were launching it, and then the head of legal came and said, "Do not release that. Please do not stop everything." So I remember we were just going to the office to release it because release cycles happen in the night, right? So and then I saw the message. I was like, "Huh, we are not releasing it today." So then I told the team was like not happy. They were like, look, we spent this much time. But then I had a meeting with the head of legal. She said, if you released it, we will have a problem. Immediately, millions of euros, we have to pay that in fines because this is not compliant.
So I mean, that's a worst case scenario, of course, that you build something and then it's being stopped at the last hour. But having said that, ideally the legal and the compliance team is part of the development process. So I always would say, so first of all, you need to make sure that you have the right legal people on board. Just people that say no, certainly not the right people. You need to have problem solvers as legal team. However, assuming you have that, see them as your partners, see them as people that solve the problems that you have together with you. And ideally, then you can avoid a lot of those challenges that you described.
No, that meeting changed everything for us. But you have helped multiple companies also navigate licensing and infrastructure decisions, right? Because again, infrastructure is because of the compliance is a little bit different. What should founders and executives actually consider when setting up bank infrastructures?
First, understand what differentiates player. So I personally recommend, before you start drafting an RFP, talk to some of the vendors to understand what are differentiation aspects. Because very often the industry has changed so quickly that you might not even realize what are the true differentiators. The other aspect is understand the strengths and weaknesses in some of the key infrastructure decisions. For example, do you want to go with cloud or with on-prem solutions? That actually changes quite a bit and limits also your vendor selection one or the other way. Another aspect is, of course, what do you want to build yourself? What do you want to outsource to a third party? There are a lot of aspects where it makes sense to outsource it. On the other side, there are certain core aspects where you want to retain full control over it, because you might believe that this solution is actually something so core to your USP and your differentiation that there's no one that will build it as good as you want to build it. But to be clear, there are very few of those. Half of the ones where people would argue that it needs to be in-house maybe aren't. And then last but not least, be very structured in what you need. And of course, eventually, if you can, pilot it.
Mm-hmm. So then there are 3 points, right?
Well, it's a bit more. I think it was 5, right? It was understand your vendors, talk. I would even add, not just talk to vendors, but also talk to other companies to understand what is actually on the market, what are the dimensions, the selection criteria that you need to define. Then have a very structured plan how to do it, and take decisions on some very, I would say, key aspects, like key strategic decisions. Then have a very rigorous RFP, pilot it. That's maybe it's 4 points.
4 points.
Yeah.
I mean, and also there's a lot of misconception. Before I worked in fintech, I used to stay away from fintech. I never even applied to fintech. I would stay far away.
Okay.
But that time I remember I was just getting calls for fintech. Whichever headhunter reached out to me, Majid, I have this fintech that's interested in a product person. Another guy, yeah, bank is interested. I was like, dude, what's happening? So I was like, maybe this is a sign I have to go in this domain. So I ended up there. It was fun, and to be honest, now it's one of my favorite industries. Not gonna lie,
Yeah.
it is so different than any industries, because you can literally sit down with your competitor on the same table and you can discuss what's happening. And they will not
Yeah.
hide information. They will tell you exactly what's happening. Also in fraud prevention, like the whole merchant risk council, MRC, you see people actually meeting up and discussing how can they make lives better, how can they improve solutions, what's happening in the industries, regulations. You see everything. They're openly discussing it. Why? Because I think it's all about passion, like you also mentioned. And then it's, at the end of the day, it's helping the people, right? Helping the end customer who's actually using the banking services or any solution. So, but what, in your opinion, are the biggest misconceptions about international expansions in fintech? Because N26 also expands now. It operates in multiple markets, right?
Yeah. 24.
24. That's good. That's good. And what does it take to succeed, in your opinion, or what did you see to succeed in new markets?
So first of all, every market is very, very different, both from a customer perspective as well as from a regulatory framework. Now in Europe, we have the luck, or the, let's say, chance, because Europe wasn't based purely on luck, where regulation is fairly similar, and through passporting you can even transfer your license from one country to the other and essentially offer your banking and financial services in other countries with one single European license, which is fantastic. This is a huge game changer compared to any other market, including the US, by the way. In the US, it's much more complicated. In the US, you don't just need one banking charter, but you need a banking charter for every single state.
Ooh, damn.
Or at least in some regions, there are certain clusters of states where you need one banking charter, which makes it much more complex to obtain and run a bank license in the US. Having said that, however, product-wise and culturally, there are differences, and understanding those is important. You can, of course, limit your product to a certain scope of features, which ideally is very similar. For example, the transactions, the card payments, etc. But there are other aspects that are very different. I'll give you some examples. Is you wouldn't believe how different bill payments are, like utility payments, like electricity, internet, etc. In Germany, you sign up for a contract, you have a direct debit, or pay it maybe with credit card, but mostly direct debits, where the internet provider is going to directly subtract the amount from your account. In other countries, like Italy, for example, or Greece, or in Georgia or Armenia, you have specific channels where you have to pay, and you can't just pay with any bank account with a transfer, but there's certain portals how you can do that. And so a lot of other digital banks that aren't focused on Italy, they will not enable you to offer those things. For example, Revolut isn't offering bill payments in all of the countries they operate. So that automatically means that you can't use them as a primary account in quite a few of those countries. Understanding what are the real differences and what are how does the process of using a banking product differ across markets is super important. And that requires some deep local knowledge. It requires teams that are originally from there. They understand how people pay and think and work. And it actually also means to have dedicated resources for some of those countries. So that's, I would say, the challenges across markets. And regulatory frameworks is another whole can of worms, because regulation differs quite wildly across countries. Anti-money laundering is fairly similar. It's one of the industries that is really a truly global industry. But other ones like KYC, which is the verification aspect, differ quite significantly. And consumer protection as well, and lending as well.
True. I think Austria is. I remember Austria has a very interesting kind of KYC with the mobile number. I forgot what was it called.
Not sure.
It's like you enter your phone number, then you get like a one-time password, and then...
That's yeah. They have what they have is a governmental authentication system, which is called back in the days was called Handy Signature. Nowadays it's called ID Austria, which is
Handy
basically
signature. Yeah.
it's a governmental app where you have a verified confirmation ton that you're basically using, but you can use it for any solution that is enabled this basically, and that's indeed it's a very good solution because it's you can really authenticate yourself even at websites that you never visited before. So that's definitely a pretty good solution.
Yeah, I love that. It was so simple. I would see, like, for example, whenever we had customers in Austria, they would ask, at that time it was called Handy Signature. So they would
Yeah,
say that,
yeah,
hey, you know what? Can you just enable that Handy
yeah,
Signature? At
yeah,
first, I was
yeah.
like, what is this? Like, why is this? But then when I saw the whole process, I was like,
Hmm.
it saves so much time. And for
Yeah,
the banks or any customer, it was so cheap, like so
that's
cheap.
true.
Basically they made money, we made money, we were both happy, and the
Hmm.
bank saved money at the end, right? So
Yeah,
it was like
that's true. And it's
amazing.
safer. It's
It's
safer.
safer. It
Hmm.
was really safe,
Hmm.
because like in like when I came from my master's 2013, the best option to verify yourself was go take a document to the bank, because they have actually seen your
Yeah,
passport.
yeah.
So now we don't live that in that age, thank god, but it used to be like that. Now, because we're also coming towards it, and I would love to understand who's, you had partly touched upon it, but who's your ideal customer profile look like for Hauer Advisory services, like for your startup?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, on the one side, I work with very traditional banks as well as investors and family offices that have the strong ambition to build a greenfield bank from scratch. But generally speaking, any financial institution or potential future financial institutions that has the very strong vision and ambition to build a digital bank, that's exactly my sweet spot. The other aspect is the fintechs, were typically early stage fintechs, strong founders, ideally founders that have, for whom it's not the first company, and they have an ambition to found a company that either operated in the regulated industry by themselves getting a license, or alternatively selling towards highly regulated financial institutions. And that typically means banking infrastructure, anything from compliance, anti-money laundering, fraud, authentication. So basically anything that happens under the hood of a bank and typically works as a software as a service. And those are the fintechs where am very eager to work with. And if we can add value to each other, I'd be, of course, very happy to get involved.
Hmm. So if you have a cool startup, or if you're looking for someone who has worked in banks, license, or so on, add Georg, talk to him. He's super reachable. He replied to me very quickly, so I didn't have to wait. That was the best thing I loved about Georg. It was very quick. But
Yeah,
my final question,
and LinkedIn is my best channel. So if you want to connect, reach out on LinkedIn.
we will add your LinkedIn. So my final question for today: what upcoming trends or technologies do you think will actually reshape the fintech space in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Three verticals. And by the way, this coincide also exactly with my personal investment hypothesis, or areas where I'm personally engaging myself, both on advisory and venture building side. One is digital banking, but digital banking not necessarily in retail banking in Western Europe, but retail banking in emerging markets where the digitalization of banking hasn't happened yet. But on the other side, I am a strong believer that digital banking is also in the West. It's going to transform, especially for SMEs, so corporate banking, and second, wealth management. I believe that private banking is nowhere near where it could be and where it should be, and that the next generation will require a totally different way of interacting with their wealth advisor. Second vertical is B2B bank infrastructure. I believe that the digitalization of fintech is only 1% done. All the rest is still coming. Why? Because it's like an iceberg. It's like what we see so far is the interface. That's kind of what's the tip of the iceberg. The entire aspect, the rest of the iceberg is still underwater. You couldn't see it, and that's the area which is the infrastructure. It's compliance. It is core banking systems. It is essentially anything that powers the bank itself, because a lot of those solutions are still very ancient. They're written in COBOL, created in the 70s and 80s. I believe a lot of the digitalization and innovation the next 10, 15 years to come is going to happen under the hood of a bank. And last but not least, one trend is I'm a strong believer in the tokenization of assets. I believe that any security, any assets that we own in future can be on chain, so on blockchain. And there is absolutely no reason nowadays that, for example, bonds, when they are being issued, that it still requires an investment bank to underwrite it and to sell it. And that process costs 3% of the entire value of the bond. There is zero value for having humans involved to that extent, and especially expensive investment banks. I believe all that, generally speaking, securities, assets, real world assets, all that can and should be traded and stored in future on chain. And I believe that we are going to see in the next couple of years a true emergence of infrastructure companies offering on-chain solutions, but on the other side that even traditional banks and exchanges are going to be fully migrated to on-chain solution in the next 10, 15 years.
I mean, we already see a lot of companies adapting blockchain, and also I think digitalization is key because it's getting harder and harder to find people for COBOL as well. But I think this is a process, right? At the end of the day, this will take time.
It is.
But with that, I would like to thank you so much for joining in today, Georg. This was actually very much fun. We discussed a lot of key points. I think it is very educational. I'm actually going to send it to probably all my friends and say, just listen to it, because you will learn about fintech and also how things work at a management level, and also in a more regulated industry, because I think there are things everyone can pick. And also it was fun, like learning about how did you end up with fintech and also other things. Is there something you would like to say as a closing remark for our listeners who made it this far?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks a lot for having me. It's really always a pleasure to be with you and talk to you. I would say one closing remark is, if you wanna found a company or actually bring innovation to the world, walk around you in your daily life with open eyes. And every single time you incur a problem where you think, damn it, why does this happen to me? Or why is this so complicated? Or why is this troubling me? Write it down. Because every single time that you experience that, you might be onto a problem that hundreds, if not millions of people are experiencing every day. And those are the exact problems that are worth solving. And some of those problems worth solving are potential businesses. And a few of those businesses are potential billion-dollar businesses. So walk through the world with open eyes, and you might be actually stumbling across some really good business ideas.
Thank you. This was very insightful. I mean, that's very true. It immediately clicked Miro to my head. And,
Thank you.
It just clicked Miro, like something simple, and there is this problem of the whiteboarding, right? But it made life easy. But thank you again, Georg, for also the valuable advice. To our listeners, thank you for tuning into The Executives this week. If you found this episode valuable, do not forget to subscribe, share it with your network. And if you want to connect with Georg, his links and his LinkedIn would be mentioned in the description section of the video. So connect with him if you have a startup, or if you just want to see if he can offer any services or something. Until next time, this is Majid signing off.